All right, so we are running out of time, and we're taking the written final today and multiple choice final next week and early next week, and we still have one more world history unit test over World War II to take. So we just feel like everything's kind of in a rush to get to the end of this school year. So we're going to look to finish up with World War II, and that's about where we're going to have to stop. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to get too much further than World War II. Maybe I can talk a little bit about the Cold War as we prepare for the final, but had we been meeting face-to-face every day, I think I would have been able to get a little bit further in world history. But anyway, so where we left off, we in the Pacific, we are now winning after the Battle of Midway, and we are island hopping from island to island, not every single island, picking and choosing which islands to hop on. And the first one we've hopped on was Guadalcanal. I've got my little Australian Shepherd right here. She's going to be with us today in this video. She wants to shake. But I've got, we're island hopping, like I said, in the Pacific, and so far we've just hopped on Guadalcanal. We're going to continue hopping on islands on our way towards Japan. In the Soviet Union, the turning point over there was the Battle of Stalingrad. We did that yesterday, I believe. The Germans had surrounded Leningrad, they had surrounded Moscow, they had surrounded Stalingrad, and another winter had set in, and the Russians used this winter to their advantage. They're going to surround the Germans and kind of force a huge number of them to surrender at Stalingrad. So after Stalingrad, the Soviets are winning in their part of the war. So we're winning in the Pacific. Our allies, the Soviets, are winning in the Soviet Union. Now, over here in Western Europe, actually we had invaded North Africa first and had knocked out the Desert Fox, Erwin Rommel. Then we went north to Italy. So started there, you can see. Then went north into Italy to knock out Mussolini. And now we have to get up into like the France area. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Well, we're already in Italy. Let me see if I can get that. Thank you, Scarlett. We're already in Italy. Why not just keep going north into France? And while theoretically that's possible, you would have to go through the Alps, which are just really huge mountain chains. So that's probably not the best strategy. So we're just going to straight up invade France by boat, okay? And you know, in earlier videos we talked about this in the Pacific. We had to do this over and over again. In the Pacific, it's called an amphibious invasion, where you start off on the water and you end up on the land. We know this is going to be awful. We know the Germans have every inch of every coast of France just covered with machine guns. And we know it's going to be awful, but we know we got to do it. But we put it off, and we put it off, and we put it off for as long as we can. And finally, there's no putting it off any longer. We just gotta do it. So this is going to be a very famous invasion. Very famous battle. It's known by a couple names. Most famously, it's called D-Day, but it's also called the invasion of Normandy. Okay, so just to be clear, Normandy is in France. I know France is usually our friend, so invading our friend doesn't make sense. But France at this point is actually controlled by Germany. So we are invading German-controlled France. And the place where we choose, like I said, is Normandy, and we call it D-Day. And it was June 6th, 1944 is when this very famous battle is going to take place. It's mainly Americans, but you also have British and other forces as well, maybe some Australians as well. All different sorts of allied groups, good guys are going to be involved, but it was mainly an American mission for the most part. And it involved parachuting guys in behind enemy lines, and then the next morning storming the beaches. So we would have, you know, we'd have guys parachuting back here. The next morning we'd have boats up on the beaches here, and we'd kind of have them surrounded. but it was just a huge undertaking. We actually, we knew it was going to be awful, so we tried to, excuse me, throw them a curveball. And we wanted to make them think we were attacking like way over here. Instead, we attacked here. So we came up with like literally fake radio messages, a fake army base that was planning a fake attack. Like, we went to great trouble to try to make Hitler believe we were attacking way over here in France. And we ended up attacking Normandy. So I told you about this movie, Saving Private Ryan. The first 20 minutes of that are just so intense. And it shows this invasion of Normandy. If you haven't seen that, please at some point make sure you go back and watch that. Saving Private Ryan, the first about 30 or so minutes. World War II vets who went through this invasion said that was an extremely realistic depiction of what it would have been like. And as you're watching that, just remember, we surprised them. They weren't even expecting us there. And as hard as it was, just imagine if they were expecting our attack, it would have been pretty much impossible. But for those of you who aren't going to end up going back and watching, again, imagine like a beach, hotels full of machine guns just pointed down at you, and you've got to get out of the water, run up the beach without any of those machine guns hitting you. It would have been a terrifying experience, and the bravery of those men having to endure that is just mind-boggling. Every time I think about it, I'm just like, they were so brave. But anyway, so the purpose of D-Day, that gets us in the door, so to speak. Once we get kind of our foot in the door, once we get a little piece of France under our control, we're gonna bring more men, more tanks, and we're just gonna slowly, over the next year or so, take back France. And then once we do that, we're going to invade Germany as well. So D-Day is like sort of the turning point, I guess you would say, over in Western Europe. After D-Day, we slowly start to defeat the Nazis, day by day, week by week, until we eventually defeat them altogether. So D-Day, June 6, 1944, invasion of Normandy. I'm sorry I spoke a long time about that, but it really was an important battle for sure. Okay, so another famous battle in this part of Europe is called the Battle of the Bulge. Basically, after D-Day, we're slowly making our way towards Germany. Hitler goes for one last desperate attempt, sends his tanks right into our enemy line, into our lines, and we're not really expecting it. So we kind of bend, okay, and it creates a bulge in our battle lines. Well, we eventually, fight back, regain our composure, and straighten out our battle line again. But again, he charges straight ahead with some tanks. It creates a bulge in our line. We eventually recover and straighten our line out again. But it was like a last-ditch, desperate attempt. He lost a lot of tanks, a lot of men. It's kind of like a boxer who goes for the knockout and doesn't get it, and then he's just like exhausted and tired and no way he can win at that point. That's kind of what the Battle of Bulge did for Hitler. So it was a victory for the Allies, a loss for Hitler. Battle of the Bulge, and after that he has no shot at winning. Okay, so what ends up happening is if my head here is Germany, the Americans and British come in from the west, the Soviets are coming in from the east, and I'm sorry if that's backwards on camera, I don't know, but we start closing in, and we kind of smush Germany in between. Hitler, realizing the end is near, he is not going to surrender. He and his wife, Eva Braun, are said to have committed suicide in an underground bunker, and he ordered his men that their bodies were to be destroyed and burned so they would not fall into enemy hands. All right, so just to give you an idea, D-Day, or us getting into France, was June 6, 1944. About a year later, not even quite a year, May 7th, 1945 is when the Germans surrender, okay? It was actually official on May 9th, okay? So May 9th, 1945, Germany surrenders, and we call that V as in victory, E as in Europe Day, V-E Day. Victory in Europe Day, May 9th of 1945. So obviously we're happy, you know, yay, celebration, right? But we can't be too happy because we still have a war to fight in the Pacific. So we might have had a victory in Europe, but now we have to finish off the job in the Pacific. So, like I said, we were, after Midway over there, we were winning. We were going on the offensive. We were island hopping. And the first island we hopped on was Guadalcanal, nasty, nasty jungle of an island that we won back. And we're going to continue hopping. One of our next major victories were the Philippines. If you remember, that was ours, and after Pearl Harbor, they're going to come and take it from us. We had ordered our major leader on the Philippines, General Douglas MacArthur. He had been ordered to leave because they did not want him falling into enemy hands. And his last words were, "People of the Philippines, I shall return." And guess what his first words were when he got back? "People of the Philippines, I'm back. I have returned." So he will come back. We will win back the Philippines. Unfortunately, like I said, when it was conquered, many of our POWs there were killed on the Bataan Death March. It was a terrible, terrible, grueling march that they forced our prisoners of war through. But we do get that island back. Now, or those islands back, that colony back. At this point, Japan's kind of getting desperate, and they turn to kamikaze pilots. So I'm not sure if they've been using these the whole time, or only if when they started to get desperate. But they would have pilots just fly their planes into our targets, whether it was our big boats, small boats, or big boats, anything that they thought was valuable to us. You know, they would just, you know, fly their planes into it. Kamikaze, suicide Japanese pilots. If you remember, we used that word first semester, and it was a word the Japanese used for this hurricane that saved their island from the Mongols. So first semester, kamikaze means hurricane that saved Japan from the Mongols. Second semester, kamikaze means suicide Japanese pilots who are flying their planes into our boats on purpose. All right. Next major battle after the Philippines is a really famous place called Iwo Jima. It's I-W-O-J-I-M-A. It's not pronounced Iwo Jima, but that's what it looks like. It's pronounced Iwo Jima. And there's a very famous picture. I'll put it right here for you on this video, of these men holding up a flag. And it's a very famous picture. It's become a very famous statue, or there's statues of this picture. But there was some very tough fighting on that island. You know, that picture, you know, we had just taken a elevated position on that island called Mount Suribachi, and we had planted a flag at the top, and those men were actually replacing the flag, taking the original flag down, putting a new flag up. The original flag was going to be a souvenir for some high-ranking general, and a photographer was there and snapped that picture. You know, the sunlight was right, the shadows were right, the wind was right, you know, everything was just right, and that picture became, you know, a very famous picture in American history. But that was some really tough fighting there on Iwo Jima, really tough. After a few months of fighting, we do end up taking that island, Iwo Jima. All right, then we had another island. The book doesn't mention too much about it, but it was Okinawa. For those of you who are Karate Kid fans, this is where Mr. Miyagi was from, the original Karate Kid. And anyway, it was another island relatively close to mainland Japan, the main part of Japan. And again, a lot of tough fighting. Another island. So Iwo was extremely tough. We lost many American lives on Iwo Jima. We lost many American lives on Okinawa, but we ended up winning both of those battles. So at that point, the only thing left was Japan. And we knew that invading Japan, I mean, invading these islands was tough. How much infinitely more tougher, if that's even the right way of saying it, would invading Japan be? And a lot of American leaders felt that we would lose maybe 500,000 lives if we invaded Japan, and that's American soldiers' lives, and that's not certainly something we wanted to do. So Truman, who was oh, by the way, President FDR had passed away by this point. He actually passed away, I believe, just a month or so before Hitler surrendered. So his vice president, Harry Truman, is now in charge. So he has one option of invading with soldiers, and many American soldiers would die. But they've secretly been working on some new technology called the atomic bombs, and a little bit about the atomic bombs. So all of the research behind it started in New York, Manhattan, and everything was really top secret. It was called the Manhattan Project, one of the most top secret, best kept secrets in American history. But you had all these mathematicians, all these scientists, and they were all given a task to do, and they only knew what their task was, and very few people knew the whole big picture. Most people just knew what their task was. And so you have all these scientists and all these mathematicians working on their tasks, When all the technology and science was figured out, then they moved out to the deserts. Los Alamos is where they're actually going to build these things. It was an old boarding school, so it had dorms, it had classrooms, dorms for the scientists and soldiers to live in, classrooms for, to build these things. And again, still a very well kept secret. All right. And Los Alamos, by the way, is out in the deserts of New Mexico. It's one thing to come up with the math in Manhattan, but you don't want to be building this thing in Manhattan just in case something bad went down. So Manhattan Project is building or coming up with the science behind the atomic bombs. Los Alamos is where they were actually built and tested. So President Truman has this other option. He chooses the atomic bombs. Now, we sent warning to them, okay? We don't just like out of the blue bomb them with some weapon nobody's ever seen before. We sent warnings. He said, you can expect utter and complete ruin from the air if you don't surrender. And they did not reply, and they did not surrender. So on August 6th of 1945, we drop an atomic bomb on the city of Hiroshima, is how you usually hear it pronounced. I believe it's probably Hiroshima. Between 70 and 80,000 people died there in that attack. They still did not surrender. They still did not surrender. So 3 days later, on August 9th, we dropped another bomb on another port city of Nagasaki, and another 70,000 or so were killed. And that doesn't even take into account all the radiation that followed and all the problems that followed later. So there's huge debates on what we should have done here. I see both sides of the debate. If you don't use the bombs, many American citizens, soldiers are going to die. If you do use the bombs, Japanese civilians are going to die. So I can see both sides of the argument. I know the pros and cons of both. So I'm not sure what the best answer was. I'm glad I'm not the one who had to make that. But this is how it happened, and they are going to surrender because of it. September 2nd, 1945 is Victory in Japan Day. That's when they surrender, VJ Day. So you have VE Day in May of 1945, VJ Day in September of 1945. All right. The last thing about those atomic bombs, there were two of them. Let's see if I can remember their names. Fat Man and Little Boy. They were actually shaped a little differently. You can, look all this stuff up online. But yeah, Fat Man was one. Little Boy was one. The plane that dropped them was called they used to name planes and draw pictures on the sides of them. The Enola Gay. And it was named after the mother of one of the pilots. Gay is not commonly used for a woman's name anymore, but it used to be a pretty common female name. The Enola Gay was what that plane was called. So, all right, so that brings us to the end of World War II. We do need to talk a little bit about the agreements and the treaties and the things that happened right after the war. Be looking for a few more of these section quizzes over World War II. I put on E-Class today. I'm going to take all these chapter 32 quizzes and add them up to make one test grade, our last test grade. So you've already done 32.1 and 32.2. Be looking for a few more 32 quizzes that I'm going to add together and make it your last test grade. Okay? As always, if you have any questions, please reach out and email me at chris.hayes@gcpsk12.org. And I hope you have a wonderful day, and we will see you tomorrow.